It's that time again, time to talk and learn more about menopause in general and prevention of endometrial uterine cancer in particular. I'm Menopause Taylor, your faithful teacher. This is video number 336, the 17th video in our unit on endometrial uterine cancer, and the 6th video on your options for preventing it. Thus far, we've discussed the basic principles for preventing it, your dietary options for preventing it, dieting to prevent it, exercise to prevent it, and herbs to prevent it. None of those even comes close to the power of HRT, or hormone replacement therapy, for preventing it. But to utilize HRT, you have to understand how to use it properly. And using it properly consists of two different things: how to take HRT and how much HRT to take. So today I'll discuss how to take HRT. This is our section on hormone options for preventing endometrial uterine cancer. And next week I'll discuss how much HRT to take. And be sure to take note of the fact that HRT decreases your risk of endometrial uterine cancer in general. That's why we're discussing it here in the part on preventing HRT and all your options for doing so. Now, all of chapter 31 in my book, whether you have the first edition or the second edition, is on endometrial uterine cancer. And a large chunk of that chapter is on what we'll address here today. I always like to start with a review just to orient you to the topic. When it comes to how to take HRT in order to prevent endometrial uterine cancer, it's all about the regimen. Way back in video number 41, I first introduced you to HRT regimens. The word regimen only pertains to HRT that includes both estrogen and progestogen. And all women who still have their uterus have to take both estrogen and progestogen unless they've had an endometrial ablation that completely destroyed 100% of their endometrial lining. So if you still have your uterus and you want to manage your menopause with HRT, you definitely need to understand HRT regimens. Now, women without their uterus can take estrogen all by itself every day. They definitely have an easier situation. But for those of you still carting your uterus around, let's reflect on what used to happen when your ovaries still produced estrogen and progesterone. This is a picture I showed you in video number 325. It demonstrates what happens to the inner lining of your uterus with each menstrual cycle. That inner lining is called your endometrium. And this picture demonstrates that estrogen causes your endometrium to get thick, while progesterone causes it to shed. In video number 325, I used some analogies to help you remember this dynamic. Estrogen is the fertilizer that makes the grass grow. Progesterone is the lawnmower that cuts the grass. Or estrogen creates the stuffing, like the stuffing in a turkey, and progesterone causes sloughing of the stuffing. So your endometrium alternates throughout your cycle between thick and thin. And I've shown you all of these props before. This is all part of the review. Thick and thin, thick and thin. When you're still having your menstrual cycles, this happens spontaneously on a monthly basis. But when you become peri or post-menopausal, this whole process goes bonkers. During perimenopause, your progesterone disappears, leaving estrogen all by itself. Well, estrogen all by itself constitutes unopposed estrogen, which is a risk factor for endometrial uterine cancer. So all that estrogen can result in stuffing with no sloughing. Or it can create stuffing with sloughing in the form of very, very heavy periods. Either way, it's a big inconvenience both in the short term if you have heavy bleeding or in the long term if you end up with endometrial uterine cancer. When postmenopause comes along, you lose your estrogen. So now you have neither estrogen nor progesterone. And if your endometrium is already nicely mowed, no problem. But if it hasn't been mowed in a while, and there's a bunch of stuffing that has not undergone sloughing, it could just sit there and become cancerous over time. So the idea behind HRT regimens is to take both estrogen and progestogen in a way that does one of two things. It either mimics what your cycles used to do by letting your endometrium alternate between thick and thin, or it prevents thickening from ever happening at all, and it just stays like this all the time. Now, the age ranges of women who need either hormone regulation for wacky perimenopausal bleeding or hormone replacement for estrogen deficiency is quite large. We're talking about women who may range in age from their 30s to their 90s. One of the basic principles I taught you about HRT requirements is that the younger you are, the more you need. So a 30-year-old prematurely postmenopausal woman will need higher dosages of hormones than a 60-year-old age-appropriate postmenopausal woman. And the big divide on dosages of hormones comes in the form of hormonal birth control options that contain both estrogen and progestogen versus hormone replacement therapy options that contain both estrogen and progestogen. You can think of them as hierarchies. All birth control options are in a higher dosage hierarchy than all HRT options. And this makes it easier for you to use the hierarchy that is most age appropriate for you. So in this tutorial about the regimens for taking both estrogen and progestogens, we are talking about both birth control and menopause hormone replacement options. This is because young menopausal women usually need to use birth control products to meet their menopausal requirements. So just think of all birth control that contains both estrogen and progestogen as the higher dosage category, and all menopause hormone replacement therapy as the lower dosage category. And what I'll do is I'll delve more into dosage next week, but for now I'm going to explain how to apply the regimens to each of these dosage categories. Okay, let's start with the first regimen, which is the cyclic regimen. The cyclic regimen is any regimen that involves creating a cycle in which your hormones change throughout the month. And you can create a cyclic regimen with either birth control or with HRT. And so we're going to start with the cyclic regimen for birth control. Now, birth control containing both estrogen and progestin comes in 3 delivery systems. You've got the familiar birth control pills, the less familiar birth control vaginal ring, and the even less familiar birth control patch. With any cyclic regimen of birth control, you simply have the estrogen and progestin for 3 weeks, and you have nothing for 1 week. In essence, your body receives the hormones in an on-off pattern that is similar to what your own hormones used to do. So, with this package of pills, all the white pills in this pack contain estrogen and progestogen. And all the brown pills are fake or placebo. So you bleed when you're taking the brown pills. That's the sloughing of the stuffing when you're taking the brown pills. If you use the vaginal ring, you put this ring into your vagina. So this is a pelvic model from the side, and if I turn it this way, you can see that here is your vagina. So the way you do this is you take this ring, you put this into your vagina, and you just leave it there for 3 weeks where it releases estrogen and progestin. Then you remove it after 3 weeks because it's empty anyway, and you go without it for 1 week, during which time you bleed, sloughing the stuffing. If you use the birth control patch, you just stick a patch to your skin every week for 3 weeks, and then you go for 1 week without it, during which time you'll bleed, sloughing the stuffing. So with all of these cyclic birth control options, it's 3 weeks on and 1 week off. And your hormone supply mimics what it used to do during your reproductive life. They all constitute alternating between thick and thin for your endometrial lining. So if you graphed your hormone levels of estrogen and progesterone over the course of one cycle, it would look like this. Here you see estrogen in orange and progesterone in blue. They are both high for 3 weeks, and then they plummet during the 4th week. And you would bleed when they plummet, sloughing the stuffing. Now let's do the same thing with HRT. There are 2 differences with HRT in a cyclic regimen. The overall dosages of estrogen and progestogen will be a lower dosage hierarchy. And your estrogen and progestogen will most likely be 2 separate products for a cyclic regimen, although there are exceptions. So for a cyclic HRT regimen, your estrogen may be in the form of an estrogen oral pill or a gel or a patch. And your progestogen may be in the form of a pill or a gel or a vaginal suppository. Because your estrogen and progestogen will likely consist of 2 separate products, you can vary how you create the cyclic regimen. In other words, you can shorten the hormone-free period to fewer than 7 days. Or you can continue taking estrogen every day and just take the progestogen on a specified number of days. Some women take their progestogen for 14 days each month. Some take it for 9 days each month. Still others take it for only 5 days each month. But remember, there must be a balance between estrogen and progestogen. So generally speaking, the fewer days you take progestogen, the higher the dosage of progestogen you'll take on those days that you do take it. And since progestogen is what produces so many yucky side effects for most women, it's something to think about. Most women definitely feel better on the days when they take only the estrogen than they do on the days when they take both the estrogen and the progestogen. So let's look at how some of these graphs would appear. This first graph shows you a cyclic regimen like the one for birth control options. You take both your estrogen, which is in orange, and your progestogen, which is in blue, for 3 weeks, and then nothing for 1 week, during which time you'll bleed, sloughing the stuffing. But remember, on the days you take nothing, you'll probably have a bunch of miserable menopausal symptoms of estrogen deficiency that disrupt your quality of life. So most women don't choose a cyclic regimen like that. Instead, they do something more like this. Now you see that for the first half of the month you take only estrogen in orange. And then you add progestogen in blue for the second half of a cycle, but you keep taking the estrogen. And then you stop taking the progestogen, but you continue taking the estrogen. So you would probably bleed, or possibly bleed, when you stop the progestogen, but not necessarily. Even if the bleeding doesn't occur, the way in which you're taking your estrogen and progestogen still constitutes a cyclic regimen. And you are still preventing buildup of your endometrial lining. The precise number of days you take the progestogen can vary. And if you choose to employ a cyclic regimen in which you never stop taking the estrogen component of your HRT, you have the option of yet another delivery system for estrogen, a vaginal ring called the FEM ring. So here we have our pelvic model again, and here we have a FEM ring. And you do the same thing, you put it into your vagina, and it delivers estrogen to your entire body for 12 weeks straight. And then after 12 weeks, you take it out by pulling it out with your long finger, and you replace it with a new one. And all you modify is how many days of progestogen you take each month. The common feature of all cyclic regimens is that you do not take estrogen and progestogen every day. You may or may not take the estrogen every day, but you do not take the progestogen every day. The important thing to recognize about a cyclic regimen is that you may or may not bleed. The cycle aspect refers to how you take the hormones, and any bleeding you do have should be at the expected time. Okay, now we'll shift gears to the continuous regimen. The continuous regimen is any regimen that involves taking the very same hormones every day so that there is no cycle. So instead of hormone levels rising and falling, they are flat. So let's start with birth control again. With any continuous regimen of birth control, you simply don't skip the week off. So instead of going for 1 week with nothing, you just keep using your birth control product every single day. So once again, all the white pills in this pack contain estrogen and progestogen, and all the brown pills are fake or placebo. On a continuous regimen, you take 1 white pill every day. And when you get to the last white pill, you throw these fake brown pills away and you start a new pack. Every time you get to the brown pills, you just toss them. And as a result, you end up taking the very same dosage of estrogen and progestogen every single day. If you use the birth control ring, you put the ring into your vagina and you leave it there for 3 weeks where it releases estrogen and progestin. And after 3 weeks, you just take this one out and you replace it with a new one. So you never go without your birth control ring and you never go without your hormones. If you decide to use the birth control patch, you stick the patch on your skin every week for 3 weeks. And when you finish this box of 3 packs, three patches, you just open another box, and on the 4th week, you slap on a new patch. So you never go without a patch, and you never go without your hormones. With all of these continuous birth control options, your hormones are always the same. So your endometrial lining does not alternate between thick and thin. It just stays thin all the time. And this is because the fertilizer and the lawnmower are both present every day, so the grass cannot grow. And if you graft your hormone levels of estrogen and progestogen over the course of one cycle, it would look like this. Now, if we do the same thing using HRT, the principle is the same. You may have a product that contains both estrogen and progestogen, like a pill or a patch. Or you may have separate products for estrogen and progestogen, and your estrogen could be a pill, a patch, a gel, or the vaginal ring. And your progestogen could be a pill, a vaginal suppository, a gel, or a progestin IUD. Regardless of your products, you would have both estrogen and progestogen every day in dosages that never change. And that same flat line graph for both would be the result. Pardon the goofy fluctuations in the y-axis spacing in these last two graphs. I tried to reflect the higher dosages, the higher hierarchy of dosages in birth control and the lower hierarchy of dosages in HRT. But the y-axis kept adjusting the parameters automatically, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it. I am not a computer tech. Sometimes you prefer one regimen, but your body prefers another. If you use the continuous regimen and you bleed, you have to get it evaluated like I described in video 327. The same is true of a cyclic regimen if you bleed at the wrong time. While the bleeding requires an evaluation, it is not a deal breaker for taking HRT. You know, oftentimes women freak out if they bleed unexpectedly. But think about it. Your endometrial lining has always responded to estrogen and progestogens with bleeding. Why would you be surprised if it responds to your HRT in that same way? All it means is that you probably need to tweak your hormones a bit. But you have to rule out a too thick endometrium first. And once you know that the bleeding is nothing more than a hormone imbalance, you can adjust your hormones and keep taking your HRT. I help women with this sort of thing in consultations all the time. Just don't freak out. And here's a bit of trivia for you. Did you know that birth control containing both estrogen and progestogen during your reproductive life actually lowers your lifetime risk for endometrial uterine cancer? See, this is one of those things that most women don't know. This is not an iffy thing. It's a big thing. Long-term birth control with estrogen and progesterone together lowers your risk of endometrial uterine cancer by a lot. And the degree to which it lowers your risk increases the longer you use it. So how much do you think birth control containing estrogen and progesterone lowers your risk? Well, it's a whopping 70% if you use it for 12 or more years. Many women use birth control containing estrogen and progesterone for much longer than that. And their risk of endometrial uterine cancer is reduced by much more than that. So stop listening to your ignorant girlfriends who tell you that birth control is bad for you and wake up to the fact that it offers some great long-term benefits. And if it's too late for you, just stop telling your daughter that it's bad for her. So now you see that the very reason that there are HRT regimens is because of the need to prevent endometrial uterine cancer. There is no other reason for regimens. So the summary is that hormonal medication options for preventing endometrial uterine cancer can consist of either birth control containing estrogen and progestogen or HRT containing estrogen and progestogen. Both can be used either in a cyclic regimen with varying dosages or days of hormones, or in a continuous regimen with no variance of dosages or days of hormones. Both the cyclic and continuous regimens serve to prevent endometrial uterine cancer. The cyclic regimen causes your endometrial lining to alternate between thick and thin. The continuous regimen never lets it get thick in the first place. So now you understand the logic behind the two regimens. Next, you need to understand the concept of balancing the dosages of estrogen and progestogen. So that's what we'll discuss in the next video. Don't you just love it when everything makes sense and enables you to make choices that will really work best for you? That's what this education is all about. If you need any help at all in choosing a regimen, or if you're having any kind of problem with your regimen, just go to menopausetailor.me and schedule a consultation with me. I will make it much easier. If you want to see photos and messages about things going on in this menopause business, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram. Subscribe to my newsletter in this channel because I said so. And I will see you next week. Bye.